Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Arun sir, for this wonderful opportunity. So my topic for today is strabismus evaluation simplified. Well, let us proceed stepwise. The first step would be to assess the history, followed by visual acuity, motor, sensory examination, and then dilated refraction and fundus. In step one, as soon as the patient presents to you, the most important would be to ask him about his deviation. How long is the deviation? Is it an intermittent or a constant deviation? Associated symptoms, for example, like diminution of vision, diplopia, each of these in their own gives us a lot of information with respect to whether it is an acute onset or has it been there for a long duration of the time. Associated asthenopic symptoms about the refractive errors, and if there is any associated cosmetic problems like abnormal head posture, palpebral fissure changes, which indirectly may hint us to the diagnosis right at the level of the history. Vision assessment, the age appropriate vision assessment, for example, up till 2 years of the age, any of these can be used like optokinetic nystagmus, tellers or the Cardiff acuity charts. And after 2 years of the age, we can shift them to Lia symbol chart or to HOTV chart and the letter acuity once they start becoming a school going age group. So once we come to motor examination, there are few steps which we have to identify. The first question would be, is there a squint? Yes. Then what is the type of the squint? If that is found out, what's the amount of the deviation? And then we assess the extraocular muscles to assess other type of associated pattern strabismus and do some special tests before going in for the surgery. So the first question, is there a squint? Why is this question important? Because majority of the children do present to us with pseudostrabismus. So in these cases, like for example, in case of pseudoesotropia, a prominent epicanthal fold. In pseudoexotropia, the presence of myopia, hypertelorism has to be ruled out. The other aspect of is there a squint, why it is important is many times the children do present to us with abnormal head postures. We feel there is no squint, but in these cases, we need to correct the head posture, assess the squint, and then maybe the squint starts to manifest. So both the ways can be possible. There is a squint we don't see, or there is no squint we start seeing. And then we need to confirm by doing a cover uncover test. The most important aspect here is to remember that it is not an alternate cover test. You don't just go and perform an alternate cover test here. We cover the apparently fixing eye and do look at the squinting eye, whether it takes up the fixation, which tells us about the apparent vision of the eye, followed by that whether it maintains the fixation. Close now the apparently now with the eye which is fixing again, and look at the other eye and how this eye undercover starts to behave. So with this, we don't not just get the type of the deviation, the vision of the dominance of the eye or the vision of the eye. Sometimes we can even find out whether it is pseudo-ESO or pseudo-XT. For example, this patient was referred to me with respect to exotropia, but on cover uncover test, there is no movement, and that shows that the myopic child has got a pseudo-XT. Sometimes a cover uncover test just helps us to make a diagnosis. For example, in both of these cases, there is an R over L, but in one case it is a DVD and in other case it is a SO palsy. So just by performing a cover uncover test, we can find out the diagnosis. So the cover uncover test is a very important step which gives us about a major amount of the information just by doing a simple test with a lot of concentration in the OPD. The next, once you find out what is the type of the squint, we would go about measuring the deviation, where there are two important things. The first one could be prism bar cover test, where you basically place the prism in front of the eye with the apex pointing towards the deviation or the base opposite to the side of the deviation, and we perform the alternate cover test till the increase the prism the strength till basically you neutralize the deviation, or increase it further when it actually reverses the movement. Then you can come back, and the point where it got neutralized is the amount of deviation. But there may be some patients where the vision may not be really good due to certain reasons. In those cases, we can actually perform a modified Krimsky test, where if you can look here, this left eye has underwent a surgery, retinal surgery, and not much vision is left with respect to the left eye. So we can just place the prism with base opposite to the side of the deviation on the fixing eye, and the approximate place where the left eye becomes almost straight is considered to be the modified Krimsky, and that is where we actually go in for the correction aspect. So once you measure the amount of the deviation, now you have to look or the associated strabismus like pattern strabismus. Is there any A pattern, V pattern? And that could be found out by looking at extraocular movements, especially the movements of the inferior oblique, superior oblique, to look out for the associated patterns, because if these are not corrected, then the amount of the squint just by correcting the horizontal deviation may not be sufficient in majority of the patients. Whenever postgraduates or fellows are assessing the movements, it's very important to assess both the ductions as well as versions, and the similar way they would be depicting in their exams also, ductions as well as versions. So ductions are basically uniocular and versions are basically binocular. Now, if in the ocular movement you found out there is some superior oblique or inferior oblique abnormality, you would go ahead with performing few special tests. For example, if at all you find out a superior oblique palsy, you can do an Pilchowski's head tilt test, or you can perform a double Maddox rod test to find out the amount of the torsion. If you happen to find out there is any nerve palsies, then in those cases maybe you would have to find out or plan the type of the surgery. You can do an FGT on table, in the OPD, or an FDT on table. So these are few special tests which helps us in reaching an extra 1 mile before performing a surgery on the patient. So for the rectus, it is basically lift up and perform the FDT, and for the oblique, you basically push the globe behind and then you perform the steps. You need to assess both the torsional movement for the FDT for both torsion as well as for the elevation, depression, or the horizontal movements per se. So once all of these motor evaluation has been done, then we go to sensory. There has been a question many times, why motor first and why sensory? Well, my explanation for that would be that once you know which eye is squinting, what is the approximate vision with respect to cover uncover test, at least we get to know which eye to expect sensory abnormality and what sensory abnormality to expect. Based on that, the sensory tests can be done. But there are varying explanation. Some people do perform sensory tests before motor evaluation also. So in case of patients with squint, if it is an acute squint, most common sensory abnormality would be diplopia. In case of chronic, then the adaptation would be with respect to suppression or eccentric fixation. So these are few tests which we can do in the sensory test with respect to suppression, the diplopia, or if there is an ARC with respect to the adaptation, sensory adaptation. Stereo acuity, any of the test, qualitative or quantitative, the stereo test can be done even for a 2-year, 1-year-old child. The titmus fly can be done for them if they are really cooperative. The stereo tells us whether to perform the surgery, what would be the outcome of the surgery, special procedures with respect to surgery when we are doing with them. So stereo is very important step with respect to the evaluation of the strabismus. And finally, how can we forget refraction? Cycloplegic refraction, because the abnormal refraction may be responsible for the squint, and just by correcting this refractive error, you can actually treat the squint to a vast majority of the extent in many of the patients. So finally, I would like to conclude, evaluation of the strabismus thoroughly should be evaluated. Single step cannot be done. As Sir straight, it is basically a mathematics. 1 + 1 is equal to 2. You cannot skip any one in this equation. So, but still, I think it is one of the most rewarding thing, because most of the things are done by us and not with any machines. Thank you. Sir, you are muted.
Sir, you're muted, sir.
Yeah, superb presentation, Dr. Deepti. And I don't think it can be simpler than this. She has simplified it to the core. Strabismus evaluation, you have to remember our aim is, one is to diagnose amblyopia, and second is to diagnose the binocular vision abnormality. So whenever we are treating strabismus, we have to treat the amblyopia and we have to treat the binocular vision. So she has very nicely highlighted the steps. Most important is the visual acuity assessment to diagnose amblyopia, then the motor tests and the sensory tests, and the type of strabismus. So with that, you'll be able to diagnose amblyopia. And here I would like to emphasize the fixation pattern which Dr. Deepti mentioned. Fixation is a very simple test to diagnose amblyopia. Even in a small baby, even a 3-month, 4-month baby, you can diagnose the fixation preference, and thereby you can come to a diagnosis of amblyopia. So I think we'll have the question and answers at the end. We'll